Well, here we are back in Photoshop, and in this video we're going to continue working on our wireframes. So far we've created a single region at the top of the document, and it's going to represent our top banner for our site. Here it is over in our Layers panel. It's our top banner. We can toggle it on or off. And at this point we have our guidelines disabled, so let's turn those back on. Command semicolon or Control semicolon is going to toggle the visibility of our guidelines. And let's go ahead and create a few additional regions on this document. So I'm going to tap the U key to make sure my rectangle tool is active and enabled. And I'm going to create a left column on this region, on this template, I should say. And I'm going to span it across 4 columns. So I'll start below my top region here, come across 4 columns, and I'm going to come down a ways because I want this to represent a fairly large region. And I'll release the mouse button to create that. And let's create another one here, and I'm going to make this occupy basically the rest of the space. So I'll click and drag and come all the way over here to the last guideline and release. Okay, with these 2 shapes in place, first thing I'm going to do is label them. And I'm going to call rectangle 1 most recent stories. And I'm going to call rectangle 2 top stories. So I'm actually assigning values, meaningful labels to each one of our regions here. Now you'll notice that these different shapes I've set up don't quite match up. The one on the right here is a little bit taller than the one on the left, and I'm not sure their top positions match up either. So after we create the rough shapes, we want to go back in and fine-tune them using our free transform tool to make sure everything is squared up just right. And I'm also going to put a 20 pixel gutter or margin in between my top banner and then these shapes below it, in keeping with the 20 pixel theme for all of our gutters. So I'm going to come to my most recent stories layer, click that to activate it. If you're not sure which layer you're working with, and we have all these different shapes here, so it's hard to tell right now, if you toggle the visibility, that confirms which one you're on. And I'm going to tap the Command T key to go into free transform mode. Now I just created this shape, and so the reference point, the registration point, or sometimes known as the anchor point, is right in the center here. I'm going to click in the upper left corner of that option to change it to the upper left corner. And now I can see my Y value is set to 262. And coming off the top, I know that my I have a 20 pixel gutter or margin here, and then I know my top, or rather my top banner shape is 200 pixels tall. So that means if I wanted a 20 pixel gutter between my top banner region and my top or most recent stories region, then I want to make that 240 pixels. So I'm going to change my Y value here to 240. Whoops. Okay, and let's say I wanted to make my height exactly 800. It's 868 right now. I'm going to make it 800. Okay, that looks good, and I'll confirm those changes. And now I want to do the same treatment for my top stories column. So I'll come over to the top stories layer, hit Command T to alter that region. My Y value is currently 708, but remember my reference point is in the center, so I'll change that to the upper left. I'll make my Y value 240, and I'll make my height 800. Click to confirm that change. And now I have a couple of good regions set up, and I'm beginning to kind of see how this page may actually come together. Let me turn off my guidelines here to get a better look at everything. Okay, there we go. So at this point I have a bunch of blocks, a bunch of regions, but it's hard to know just looking at them what each of these represents. So it's very important to add labels to each one of our regions. And we do that using our text tool in Photoshop. We can tap T at any point to get to our text tool, and then we can start drawing, start typing. So I'm going to click roughly over the shape that I want to put a label on. In this case, we'll start with our top banner. Click on it one time, and as you'll see, as soon as I click, I get a new layer in my layers panel, and I'm simply going to type in top banner. Okay, if I'm happy with that, I can click to confirm it, and I'm going to tap the V key to move back to my Move tool, and now I can click and drag this label around. You'll notice, because snapping is turned on, I can click and drag it to the upper left of my shape here, and then I'm going to use my Shift key, hold down Shift, and I'm going to hit right and down a couple of times to move this to the upper left corner, but to give it a little padding within that corner. So I'll come over to the right 3 times, and I'll come down 3 times, and there I have a label for that first region there. Now, if I wanted to change the way that my type appears, a couple of ways to do that. One is to open up the character window inside of Photoshop. So if we come to Window and come down to Character to turn that on, and here we have a bunch of options for changing my character. My font face right now is Helvetica, and it's bold, and I have a 30 pixel size assigned to it. The color is white. Most importantly, we want to make sure we have a good contrast between the color of the region and the color of the font. A dark gray background against a white font is a good combination. If I needed to change the color for some reason, I could simply click on this color swatch and then click and drag to go to a different color. I'm going to leave it on white though. And I can make other alterations here. If I didn't want bold, I could make it regular, for example. I don't need to do a whole lot of work on this though, because remember, this is not representing the actual typography on my site. I'm simply creating labels for my wireframes. Okay, so with that label in place, let's go ahead and create our other labels here. I'm going to click on the T tool, or you can also just tap the T key on your keyboard. We'll come over our most recent stories area and type in most recent stories. Click to confirm that, tap the V key, and then bring it down a little ways, tap the T key, and do our top stories region. Okay, so there we have now 3 labels and 3 shapes, all part of our wireframes. In addition to actually labeling each of these regions, it's probably not a bad idea to also indicate the size of each region. So what we could do is come back into one of our labels here and add the dimensions for that region. Let me first of all double check what my dimensions are for the top banner. So I'm going to click on that shape, top banner. I'm going to hit Command T to go into free transform mode, and here I see my width is 940 and my height is 200. So I'll cancel out of there. I'll click on my top banner layer to activate that. I'll tap the T tool to move into my type mode, and now if I hover over my existing type, I can actually edit it. So I'll come into top banner. I'm going to come to the end of the line, hit return or enter to come down a line, and type in the dimensions of this shape, 940 by 200. And I'm going to make this type a little bit smaller to create a kind of basic hierarchy on this label here. So I'll go from 30 pixels down to 22. And if I'm happy with that, I can hit the checkbox to confirm it. Okay, so now I have a label with both a description for the region as well as the dimensions for the region, and I'm well on my way to setting up these wireframes here. One thing that is helpful to do is keep everything well organized inside my layers panel, and that's particularly important as we move further along and we have more and more shapes and labels in place. So one thing I like to do is have my labels right on top of the regions that they correspond with. So top banner, I'm going to move that right on top of the top banner region. Most recent stories will go on top of that, and top stories is on top of that. So everything is a bit better laid out now. Remember, you can create folders for your layers area. So I could create a folder here, and I could give it a name. It's actually a group using Photoshop parlance. And I could call this anything I wanted, and I could use it as an additional way to organize my content. Another way to keep things organized is to put the labels in one group and the regions in another. And to do that, I could call this labels, and then I could create another folder and call it regions. And then I can hold down Command to select multiple items, drag these into labels, and then click and drag these guys into regions. Okay, regions is above labels in the layers panel, and that means it's actually covering or hiding the labels. So I can click and drag labels above regions. Whoop, I just clicked it into regions, click it above regions, and sure enough I can see my labels again. So it's important to keep our documents organized. We have several tools for doing that. Labels on our items or our layers is very important, and we can also use the folder or grouping option to keep things together. The particular ways you do that, if you want to keep your labels in one folder and your regions in another, for example, is really up to you and your workflow, but make sure you are taking steps to keep everything well organized.